Hello everyone, and welcome to my studio. Today I'd like to show you how to do a beautiful watercolor sketch of this koi pond. I'm going to cover the color concept of color gradations. I'm also going to cover a drawing tip. When you begin your drawing with a pen, make little tiny dots as markers instead of lines. When you feel that your dots are in the right place, then start to connect the dots. I'm making little dots to indicate the top of the railing of the bridge, and I'm connecting the dots. It's a good way to use a pen and not have to erase. I've speeded up this part of the video so you don't have to sit through a long, arduous drawing. The drawing took me about 10 minutes to do, and I've cut the time down for you. I'm loosely sketching in the rocks, the bridge, the bushes, the reflections of the rocks in the water, which are absolutely gorgeous. And I'm putting in the foreground rocks. The foreground rocks are important because they give the viewer of your sketch a sense of where you were standing, well, where I was standing, and looking into this pond. So now I've started to draw some of the fish. Don't take your drawing too seriously. This is just a sketch. My goal is to get the feeling of this place, and the colors especially were just amazing. I want to get lots of fish drawn in, all swimming in different directions. I'm making the fish in the foreground a little bit bigger, and as they go back towards the bridge and even under the bridge, of course they get smaller as they recede, as my drawing recedes into space. Be sure to draw the little side fins and the tails. I kind of make squiggly marks for the tails. Not making them too stiff makes them also look like they're moving. Notice that when I drew the bridge, I made little small indications for the slats of wood. Little details like that are great to put into sketches. You don't spend too much time painting those details, but they're there as indicated by your ink. When you paint a koi pond, it's up to you how many fish you want to put in. Some people like to have them very crowded and the fish almost on top of one another. I like to give them a little space. I'm going to add some vertical lines to indicate the greenery and the branches reflecting in the water, and also the bridge. I decided to add this little swirl because I thought it was beautiful. I like to look for things in my reference photos that make the scene unique. Time to sign my name. Now let's paint. Now it's time to begin the painting. I'm going to use permanent red violet and cadmium red. Notice how I'm not painting a straight line. I'm making little marks and lifting my brush in between. This is because I want my brush strokes to be more interesting. If I just filled in the whole shape, then I would sort of be drawing an outline and just filling it in with paint. And it just doesn't look as nice that way. Next, I'm going to paint the slats on the bridge, and I'm going to paint the brush strokes and leave little white spaces in between. And as I do the brush strokes, I'm painting them in between the lines that I've drawn in perspective for the bridge. I'm going to use some mauve to paint the reflections of the bridge into the water. I added a little bit of permanent red violet to the mauve to make it a little closer to the bridge color. For the shadow color in the rocks, I'm using cobalt blue, permanent red violet, and a tiny bit of yellow ochre. This is a typical 3-color gray that I recommend for all my oil painting students and watercolor students. It's the perfect artist's gray. The same color is going to go in the front where the rocks are. As I'm painting, I'm leaving little bits of white, and I'm not worrying about the color being too even. I'd like it to be a little uneven because to me that looks more interesting. I've added a little bit of cobalt blue into the mauve color while it's wet. I say mauve color, but it's the 3-color gray mixture that I mentioned using cobalt blue, permanent red violet, and yellow ochre. These are cast shadows from the bridge that I'm painting onto the rocks. It's nice to have color gradations within 3-color color mixtures. So when you make a 3-color gray, you can make some of the gray more blue, some of it more reddish, and some of it more yellow. I'm using mauve to paint the shadow colors of the bridge. Notice how I'm leaving little bits of the sunlit areas of the bridge where it's light red, and in other areas I'm making the shadow color. It's important when you paint shadows to make sure that they're at least 3 value shades darker than the light color that you're painting over. Now I'm going to show you how to do a color gradation. The red bush on the left goes from deep crimson red on the left side to warm orangey red in the center to light yellow on the right. So instead of just making a red bush with light and shadow, perhaps you would use permanent red violet and then add some ultramarine blue to the shadow color to make it a deeper violet. You can make it more interesting by doing a color gradation. So you're really mapping out the colors from dark to light with colors instead of just mixing shadow colors. So you still have light and shadow on the bridge, which is important for structures, but these color gradations work fantastically well for plants. I forgot to put the turtle in, so sometimes when I do a sketch I do forget something, and in this case I still have space on the rock to add it. So it's okay to go back with your pen when you've started painting and add something. So there's the turtle. I'm mixing permanent green with gamboge. Gamboge is a beautiful transparent yellow. And I'm going to paint the bright green grass plant. I'm not really sure what it's called, so I'm calling it a grass plant. that is next to the really colorful red, orange, and yellow bush. Leaving lots of white, just popping this pretty color in. So here's color gradation lesson number 2. Add a bluish green. First I created a very yellow green, and the bush also has some dark bluish green on the left side. So to make the bluish green, I used cobalt blue and added it to the same color mixture. For the background, I want the colors to be really dark and deep. This will help the colors in the foreground look like they're glowing. To make that deep background green, I added ultramarine blue, which is darker than cobalt, some madder lake, and some burnt sienna, and created this nice dark green. For the top of the rocks, I'm adding yellow ochre. Nice, warm, sunny color. In the reference photo, the rocks look like granite rocks, and they look to be sort of a blue-gray color. And I really want to emphasize the warm and cool, which is why I chose yellow ochre for the top of the rocks. I'm going to begin painting the koi fish. I'm starting with cadmium yellow medium and one of the yellow fish. So the fish are going to be a mixture of colors. Some will be yellow, some will be red with black spots, some will be red and white, and so on. But I'm starting with the yellow ones first. The yellow ones have light and shadow, so the bottom of the fish has a deep orange color. So I'm painting the orange color into the yellow while it's still wet and letting it create a soft edge on its own, just letting the water do the work. As you're painting the little fish, be sure to leave little areas of white. This will make it look like it's a reflection in the water from the sky, or just to give it a nice sparkle. It just always looks nice in watercolor painting and in watercolor sketching to leave little flecks of white here and there. I'm using cadmium red, and for the deeper red, I've added a little bit of permanent red violet. For the fish that are red and white, I'm painting the red and just leaving white. This fish in the foreground has an orange, red right side, and then a really deep crimson dark side. I want to get all the fish painted before I paint the water. Wherever the fish have white fins, I'm making them cobalt blue. The water around them is going to be bright green, and I want the fins to look as if they're in shadow a little bit. Also, that's how they look to me in the reference photo. This white fish, I've painted cobalt blue over it first, and it has yellow spots, so I'm going to make some deep yellow spots over the white. Now that the fish are finished, I'm going to paint the little turtle. I'm using Prussian blue and a little yellow for the green shade of this dark green turtle. Next, I'm going to start mixing greens for the water. I'm using sap green, and I'm also going to use a little gamboge. And I'm going to have a variety of greens throughout the green water. Starting at the front, I'm adding small strokes of water, small strokes of green. It's perfect contrast for the red fish. And of course, I'm leaving lots of white in between. Some of the green strokes are coming right up to the side of the fish, but only at the side of the fish that would be the shadowy side. I'm going to get some phthalo green. You can also use Viridian if you don't have phthalo green, and make some darker green marks as well. As I said, I want to have a variety of dark, deep greens and light yellowy greens. I'm going to paint the little swirl in the same way that it's drawn. I'm using sap green and some gamboge. Isn't that pretty? I love that little swirl. Continuing on with the color, I'm going to just continue to fill out the green shapes in the rest of the pond, taking my time, using small brush strokes, going around the fish, thinking about reflections, warm and cool greens, and so on. Time to paint the dark shadowy areas under the bridge. I'm using ultramarine blue and mauve and a bit of burnt sienna. I'm going to create some warm darks and some cool darks, and also leave some white spaces. I'm painting this color under the bridge and around the tiny fish in the background. I'm going to connect this color with the lighter green in the foreground. I'm going to use the same color mixture on the base of each of the rocks to the left where they meet the water. I'm connecting this deep dark color with the green in my pond with sap green and also a little bit of phthalo green, giving my swirl a little bit of a dark accent as well. The rocks are also reflecting into the water a very light blue color, so I've just used cobalt blue and a little bit of mauve that's already on my palette and downward brush strokes to create the look of this reflection. I'm going to add some of the black spots to the red fish in the foreground. So I'm not using black, I'm using a mixture of ultramarine blue, mauve, and burnt sienna. Now I'm going to glaze some warmer burnt sienna over the rocks where the transition from the light to the shadow is, and I'm going to paint a little shadow under the turtle. For the shadow under the turtle, I'm using ultramarine blue and mauve. I'm going to use ultramarine blue and mauve to add some extra dark accents to the sides of the rocks where they're in shadow. I'm just going to finish up a few more dark accents, and then I want to work on the reflections in the pond. I want my accents, my dark accents, to be pretty. I don't often use earth colors. I tend to use a lot of blues and violets in place of burnt sienna and burnt umber and raw umber and things like that. I just like how these bright colors look. I'm using phthalo green and yellow ochre, which makes a beautiful deep rich green, also a touch of burnt sienna, and I want to go around the outside of the light part of the rocks and underneath that bush to create some separation. I'm bringing some of this deep green up into the bush as well. This gives it structure. Now I'm going to mix some darker greens and emphasize the vertical parts of the reflection. Notice how my brush strokes are kind of wavy. I make a little wavy line and then I make a dot. I'm going to move around the painting now, making all kinds of finishing touches. Little bits of green here and there, dark accents, light and shadow, and so on. Darks are the glue that holds your composition together. Always try to remember that. If your composition or your painting is looking kind of scattered and incomplete, it could be that it's lacking darks and that the darks aren't really connecting with each other. When you connect the darks, you don't necessarily have to connect all dark greens, for instance. But a dark green can connect with a dark red or a blue or any color. It's the values that count in this case. See how I'm applying this dark green color and it's connecting the rocks, following the reflection down to the red fish and so on. I'm sort of making lines with my brush in this dark green color, and I'm connecting the different elements in my painting. I'm still going to leave some light areas, and I don't want to cover up the light because I need lights and darks. But I also need the dark to flow in a nice way, giving my painting movement and making it all sort of cohesive. I'm also brightening some of the colors and giving the fish even darker shadow lines. This helps them look like they're moving and separate a bit from the water. Adding that little bit of dark makes the colors really glow. So that little dark accent to the underside of the yellow fish makes it really pop. Same with the red fish and the orange fish. I'm adding some greens, some greenery behind the bridge, just painting little small squares of a nice mixture of green. I've used sap green, and I've also used permanent green and cadmium yellow. I just don't want to leave the area behind the bridge white. I'm adding a few bits of yellow into some places in the water as well. Just going around making extra finishing touches of colors. I decided to glaze a little bit of a warmer red using cadmium red over the bridge. It looked a little faded to me, even with the light and dark reds. It just needed a little extra warmth. The last thing I'm going to do is add some yellow ochre to the center of the water in the pond. It just needed a tiny bit of warming up. And then we're finished. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoy painting this pond, and I look forward to seeing your work.